Welcome back to Life Skills Unfiltered, the podcast where we have real, honest conversations about life in the SEND community and explore practical ways to empower independence. I'm your host, Jo Aythray, and today we're tackling a topic that's crucial for every young person's future, maths, but not just maths in the classroom. We're talking about maths for life. For many children and young people with SEND, traditional maths education doesn't always translate into real-world skills. Being able to solve sums on a worksheet is one thing, but understanding how to handle money, tell time, measure ingredients, or even plan a journey is something else entirely. If we don't equip them with the right skills, we risk leaving them vulnerable as they move into adulthood. So, are we setting them up for success, or are we missing the mark? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Karen McGuigan, the founder of Maths for Life, a program designed to make maths accessible, practical and meaningful for learners with SEND. Karen is passionate about shifting the focus from academic achievement to real life application, ensuring that every young person has the skills they need to navigate the world with confidence. In this episode, we'll explore how maths is currently taught, where the gaps are, and what we need to be doing differently to better prepare young people for independence. We'll also dive into the impact this has on families, the risks that come with a lack of foundational math skills, and most importantly, the practical steps we can take to bridge the gap. No jargon, no fluff, just real talk and actionable advice. So let's get started. So Karen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
Brilliant. So to start off with, let's talk big picture. How do you think children with SEND are being taught maths? Do you think it's being taught in a really practical way, or do you think sometimes it's a bit more about the abstract and concept? What are your thoughts?
So all children in schools are taught the same way with following the maths curriculum. And in England, that is the national curriculum. And it's all geared up towards passing a GCSE. So in fact, the way in which children with SEN are taught is typically a differentiated form of the curriculum. But what it does mean is that they follow the building blocks that are laid out to achieve a GCSE. And that means that when they differentiate it, they tend to differentiate it by year. So if you have a child who's maybe in year 4, they will be working at year 1 or reception work. And that is largely how they differentiate it. They differentiate it down the kind of the year group. It's not always the most practical way of doing things because we have a big emphasis in our curriculum on mental maths, which we know is a challenge for children with SEN because of working memory. And so therefore we have to think about what elements of our curriculum is useful and what the building blocks are onto. And sometimes we do things where it's not necessarily in the most logical order in the curriculum. So from a concrete and abstract perspective, largely children with SEN will spend a lot longer doing much more concrete maths, understanding using maths aids. But I've always said maths aids are double-edged sword. They're brilliant for representing maths, but they can also cause anxiety because of sensory issues, or indeed from a poor fine motor skills perspective, some children with SEN find them difficult to use. So it's a double-edged sword. They're great for demonstrating, but then quite difficult at times for manipulating them. But in general, the Ofsted report from 2021 on maths for children with SEN, they do recommend that a more cyclical approach to teaching is better. So not necessarily in the large chunks that we currently teach in the curriculum or in a lot of schemes of work. So they do suggest that revisiting smaller chunks on a more often basis is a better way to teach children with SEN.
And are you finding that within that some of our children are kind of getting a bit stuck in kind of the hierarchy of things, where they might be able to access things like time, money, some of those more functional aspects, but they're getting stuck at different levels because they've not achieved the building blocks to get there? Is that something that you find? Or not so much?
That is definitely something that I find. And my biggest gripe is finding out that a child is not being progressed because they haven't secured number bonds to 10. And for me, the reality is you and I didn't do number bonds to 10 at school. It didn't stop us from progressing in maths. But because it's seen as this big milestone to achieve in year 1 maths, you have to secure that. If you don't secure it, they kind of go, well, we're still working on it. And for me, that is where it falls down, because it is about memory. And the reason that I normally ask an educator is like, why do we do number bonds to 10? What's the purpose behind them, given that we didn't do them? And then they look at me and like they don't know. And it's like, well, the reason we do it is because the curriculum is all about mental maths, and knowing number bonds to 10 helps you do harder addition quicker.
Yeah.
But if you're in the situation where you don't actually know what addition is, at the moment, number bonds to 10 is not going to help you do anything quicker. So there are loads of examples like that where we get into a situation where we're kind of almost teaching the wrong thing, because quite a lot of our children have really good recall memories when they do something often enough. So again, passing on further up the curriculum, when you go times tables, there are children who can recite times tables. Yeah. But they may know 5 times 5 is 25, but if you ask them a question that actually relates to understanding multiplication, so I have 5 balloons, I have 5 tables, I want to put 5 balloons on each table, how many balloons do I need in total? They have no idea what to do. Yeah. And in my life, I don't get presented 5 times 5 as a question on a daily basis, but those type of questions where life maths is all about what is the understanding of what I'm being asked. So we do fall into this because of the way the curriculum is focused on memory, memorization, recall, as well as methodology, the how to do stuff. We are teaching methodology and trying to reinforce recall. And I think that our children are much better in the understanding aspect of it. So that's where we kind of have limitations put on us, because when we don't understand our number bonds to 10, we don't progress on to the understanding questions, because they come after in the order in which we do it.
And one of the things we found with my daughter was, again, around the same and different side, that she'd looked at same and different, everyone assumed that she'd got same and different, but actually what they hadn't done down to the practical sides, actually she could do same and different when they were literally entirely exactly the same look. But when you looked at categorization of same and different, like, these are all cats and this is a dog, so they are the same, no clue whatsoever. So it's kind of digging into those pieces of quite practical, because actually that's a practical thing to be able to do when you're out in real life, is be able to categorize things into same and different that maybe aren't just what you would consider kind of matching cards or looking at something specific. So it's a really important skill as they get older.
Certainly, all of the pre-number skills tend to be covered at preschool, tick box, moved off, never re-engaged with. And typically developing children tend to learn as they go along and apply those skills. And I've always said, children with learning difficulties don't. We need to teach them each of those. So you and I will have figured out how to do things as life progresses. So when we look at something like same and different, it is so important to keep revisiting that. It goes back to the idea that we are always too quick to progress. The curriculum in maths is very aggressive, okay? Even for a typically developing child, it is one of the hardest subjects because of the speed it goes through. So it doesn't really afford you the time to go into some of those building blocks in a greater level of depth. So you have the obvious same and different, but when we look at much more subtle things like orientation, mirrored images, which one is the same, which one is different, or indeed you mentioned categorization. But categorization is something that we develop as life goes on. So a preschooler is not necessarily going to be categorizing the food into the fridge, into frozen and non-frozen sections, or indeed putting stuff in the cupboard as cereal and or tins. But those are life skills that we develop, and it's reusing those pre-number skills on an ongoing basis is actually what helps us develop those type of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because particularly for our young people, and that's something that we're really interested in, is actually, are we using maths and teaching them the practical math skills, do you think, in a way, particularly as they're kind of growing up into adulthood, that then go on to serve them in terms of, looking at particularly around the kind of frozen, non-frozen things, and being able to manage their times in life, even things like time, how many times have we seen children and people who just keep going and looking at time and looking at clocks and spending hours figuring out which hand's going to what, and then they go to a train station And when was the last time that anyone read from one of those clocks in a train station or bought a ticket for a bus that was in that form? It's always digital time that we're looking at, and actually, is that something we should be focusing on? So what are your views about what we should be prioritizing for our young people, particularly to give them the skills that they need to be able to access their wider communities?
So this is where speech and language will love the next message that I give, is although maths traditionally everyone thinks of as numbers, it is absolutely underpinned by language. And what we can be doing for our younger children is encouraging the use of mathematical language in a modelled environment on an ongoing basis. And that sounds, it's really easy to do once you actually get to grips with what those words are. But if I give you an example of an educator describing how to write the number 5, I will describe it as a straight horizontal line, a straight vertical line, and then a big round curve. I have used the word straight, horizontal, vertical, big, round, curve. That's 6 words that you need to know the meaning of before you can even visualize what I've described. And we need to spend more time in doing the basic level of understanding of those words. And what I mean by that, even advancing on things like understanding that sometimes there's a different mathematical meaning for a word than the word that traditionally the student or the child would know. One of the questions I got back to me that I always cite in this is when the question was display this information on a table, and the student drew a table with 4 legs with the information on top. And I go, oh, well, that is a fantastic insight into me that the student didn't understand the meaning of table in a mathematical sense. The only understanding of the word table they had was the table with 4 chairs. And we see this constantly where our children are, we're in silos of teaching. We don't think about the other aspects of it. You know, and I know I'm going to do the word more because that's my favorite, but more in the meaning of Makaton that we teach our children tends to be more of. So more milk, more biscuit, all of the others, whereas actually more in a mathematical sense is a comparative word with less, and they have to come together. You can only have more when you have less. It is a comparative word, and it's about the language. So things like measurement language, using words like long, short, tall, heavy, light. And when you're putting the shopping away, we may not be categorizing them into the frozen, but when the bags come in, is it a light bag? Is it a heavy bag? Which one is light? Which one is heavy? And this is where, as parents and educators from an early age, you having the knowledge of all of these words and actually filtering them through into your language and modeling them when you're setting the table for dinner, when you're eating your food, when you're in the car, is the way in which we can underpin that variety of understanding. So explaining that there is a different type of table, there's more than one table, and pointing out, maybe you see it in a hospital waiting room. There's a table on the wall. Do you see that? It's got information in it, as opposed to that table which we've put our cup on. So that type of thing is something I've got used to doing, and it's something that's so easy to do that takes no time and effort. It doesn't mean sitting down with the child doesn't even know you're doing it, but it is about the adult educator educating themselves to those words and knowing what they are.
And it's just taking that time, isn't it, to almost kind of label your thought processes and to do those in those really practical spaces. And as a mum, I know, I'd love to be able to sit down. Would I? Maybe I wouldn't sit down and spend half an hour a day teaching my daughter. We don't have that kind of relationship. She would look at me like I was absolutely crazy if I sat down and said, right, we're going to do our learning right now. Some people do, and that's absolutely fantastic, but it's not for us. But actually remembering, like you said, those just real basic kind of talking out loud and remembering that where are their siblings or typically developing children going to get that stuff through inference. Like you wouldn't do that if you're bringing your shopping in necessarily with a range of other kids, but actually it doesn't take much to change that mentality and just to get talking and using that language and to kind of using that comparison all the time. And it's a habit, right? And it's a hard habit to make, but once we're there,
it's easy. And you mentioned the word time. So let me go back to that, because that was what you said was one of the, the major things. Time is interesting because the research that I've done said we were missing an element in our underpinning skills, and that is understanding time passing. So one of the big things that you can add into is talking about time passing. How long does it take us to go to the supermarket? It takes us 7 minutes in the car. How long does it take you to go to grandmother's house? Well, grandmother's house is actually 3 hours away. Talking about the time passing and duration is not talking about what time is it now, what time is it going to be when we get there, but actually just giving them a sense of what things fit into hours, what things fit into days, what things fit into seconds. And that is a really easy thing to do again. It's not about the accuracy, it's about the buckets. Oh, you sneezed, ha-choo. How long did that take? That was seconds, wasn't it? So actually even using that language of seconds, minutes and hours, I always say it's like verbal diarrhea. You just talk about what you're doing out loud. And we don't tend to do that. It's the same with money.
Yeah.
We don't, quite often when we talk about money, we have never had a conversation. And the reality is our children don't ever get exposed to money until it's almost at the point where they need to understand it, when they're a teenager or when they're looking to go to college, but that's too late. We need to talk about money. And money is not something that's typically used in a physical sense, but we still can talk about how much things are and relative costs. If I may, I'll give you an example because we're in this room. We had a situation with all my children on Christmas Day a couple of years ago where they broke one of my gin glasses with a drone, an internal drone. And it fell on the ground. There was a big hoo-ha. And I was like, don't worry, they were £1 from IKEA. I have 6 of them. I'm now down to 5. It's fine. And then about 10 minutes later, they hit the clock off the wall and smashed the glass. And I was like, right, okay, you're edging up a bit. That was £10 from IKEA, but the clock's still working without the glass. And it's probably safer without the glass, but that's fine. And I said, look, can we not hit anything else? Then slightly, maybe 10, 15 minutes after that, they hit the TV. And they didn't pass any remarks about it. It didn't damage the TV, but I was like, oh, hold on. Do you realize how much more expensive the TV is to the IKEA glass? And they had no idea. So it was, again, that kind of relative talking it through and going, glass from IKEA, I can accept broken. TV, not accept. That is a lot of money to replace. And it's things like that we as parents can influence just by talking. Yeah. It's one of the things I think why teenagers have so little respect for technology is because they've got no concept of how much value it takes to replace it.
And particularly now we're all using cards and things as well. It's even when you're paying for things, it used to be kind of, you could see, they could see the value a little bit where they think lots of notes were going over for something. But actually now, you do the same action for a telly as you would do for a cup of tea.
And they don't even see that because we buy it online, it just gets delivered. I mean, COVID was great. COVID year, my youngest son asked for a jetpack from Santa Claus. And I said, I think that is a little bit much. And he was like, you can get it on Amazon. You can get everything on Amazon and it delivers to you. And I was like, I think we may have taken Amazon one step too far. But the concept of even listening to my younger son, who doesn't have additional learning needs, and saying that makes me realize that in general, this is not something isolated just to children with SEN. It's children in general don't have a very good concept of those building blocks that we need because we rely on our education system to provide it, but that's not part of our curriculum. So it then falls on the parents to do the building blocks.
Which I think as parents we're definitely not aware of as much as maybe we should be, or we're not given that information to start with, are we? So we can't necessarily be ready for those stages. But if we kind of move on then for those young people that are already out in the real world, what are the risks, do you think? What are the kind of the vulnerabilities that our guys are experiencing because they don't have those foundational blocks in place?
Well, fundamentally, they are vulnerable adults. And, that concept of understanding value is key. And probably one of the reasons I'm so motivated to do what I do on a daily basis is I see my son, Lance, who's now 12, becoming that adult and being at risk of being taken advantage of because he doesn't understand certain aspects of value. And what I mean by that is there are not nice people in the world, reality. And I feel that somebody might look at him when he's having coffee with his girlfriend Ella and go, I'll just charge them £20 instead of 10. They won't know any different. And because it's all tap, as you say, but I want him to be able to kind of just have that momentary £20 seems a bit expensive, to question that. And that is the building blocks of what we need to get to stop him from being taken advantage of. Because that person who's trying to take advantage, if Lance gives a modicum of understanding about value, they will back away and say sorry, because they won't want to get caught.
Yeah.
And I feel that there are aspects of what I want for my child moving into adulthood is the ability to work. The ability to work basically needs understanding of clock and calendar. Again, calendar, something that is very little covered in the curriculum by here's what it is, then move on. And if you think about it, you know, being able to plan anything in your diary, being able to live independently and take responsibility needs that ability to understand day, understand time, understand what is going to happen, where should I need to be. You know, there has to be a point where we look at what we're teaching them and say, is this delivering for our children in adulthood? With the best will in the world, it really annoys me when I see a 15-year-old with Down syndrome who's capable of working out the missing angles of a triangle, but doesn't know the days of the week in order.
Yes,
something has gone wrong, because clearly got capability, but we've taught them the wrong thing. Or indeed, they may have been able to do that at one point, but because it wasn't consistently, because they've continued moving up the curriculum, they haven't gone back and ensured it was being used on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things, isn't it? So things like a lot of kind of this emphasis is placed on things like being able to add up all the things in a basket and how much that's exactly going to cost by the time you get out of a shop. The last time I did that, I don't think I ever did that in my life ever, but actually then understanding things like, you know, something Learn and Thrive's looking at a little bit is like around make crime, you know, actually lending your friend a £5 and they giving it back, you know, there's no problem with that. But actually, if you've got someone that's come into your life suddenly who's saying, can you lend me £50 and I'll give it back to you next week, then doesn't give it back to you next week. So you've got to understand the value that actually that's £50 a lot of money, and that actually next week is in 7 days, and that actually to be able to manage that, and you've got someone that's repeatedly doing that. And unfortunately, we know our guys are at real risk of make crime and all those other things. So actually, like you said, it goes back to those teaching in silos, doesn't it? Because we actually teach life skills, and you know, we will be teaching life skills. We teach maths, we teach language, but at what point are we bringing them all together and respecting that actually they live in one space?
They do live in one space. Not going to lie, obviously representing maths for life. That is one of the premises behind it, because I looked at what I needed to do to make Lance less vulnerable. And it is to understand all of these building blocks, which are the life skills. But the reality is that you can't teach them in silos, as you mentioned. They all fit together. And one of the things that is really important is that at school we teach from a textbook, or we teach book-related sums. What we're actually not doing is relating it to the life that they're going to have ahead. And that for me is one of the major disconnects, is that when you're looking at a list of sums on a page, it doesn't relate to anything I see in my life with my parents, with my siblings. It doesn't relate to anything I see. So, but when we present maths and things that they do see, which is like a card reader and a card, they suddenly go, well, oh, I see my mum doing that. What is it? And it becomes much more engaging. So this idea of silos is, we not only need to bring it all together, but we need to make it understandable to our students as to why it's important. So look at the scenarios later in life to understand, why is this going to be important to me? And you're absolutely right. You can't teach mate crime without some understanding of what the difference between 50p and £50 is.
Yeah.
And that goes back to then, we need to go back to maths, because that is about understanding quantity and value. And that then relates back to your understanding of simple numerosity. So there is a chained approach where, and I think sometimes when we're looking at our adults and saying, but they don't have these skills, how are we going to teach them? You go, you actually almost have to take a step back and put all of the building blocks in place. Can be done quite quickly, but you do need to have the building blocks in place. And unfortunately, the way in which we teach today doesn't put those building blocks in place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously there'll be some amazing maths teachers out there that are doing a brilliant job and making it really practical and making it really live. But actually there'll be a lot of maths teachers that aren't doing that for a selection reasons, and why do you think that is? What is it in the education system that we're missing that enables maths teachers to kind of that light bulb moment to go on and empower them to do it? Because I know sometimes they're stuck within their own within the curriculums and with things that they have to deliver.
So this is where I may create enemies, but the reality is I've stood in front of so many educators to know this is fact, because I start all my training with my hand up. I love maths. Show of hands who loves maths as much as I do. And normally there's a smattering of hands that go up, but largely our adult population do not have a good relationship with maths. Because we got taught in a very sterile, just do it way. There was no real, why are we doing it? Just learn it. That's what we have. So you have, unfortunately, a body of educators who are delivering a maths program that they don't have any joy or feelings with, because it is quite, they don't necessarily understand why it's relevant, because they were never taught it. And that sounds like I'm saying that, our teachers can't teach. That's completely wrong. They are teaching within a structure that they have developed themselves, that they've got no passion for, and it can be quite difficult to see how to do things, or indeed the fact that our children need overlearning and they may only have one or two ideas of how to teach something, and they don't have the ability to create and see another 15 different ways of tackling the same problem in different ways. And I think they don't have the time. Some of them don't have the passion. So it's, maths is something that you need to enjoy to bring to life. And I think the reality of our children being educated more so in mainstream environments is that they are catering towards a classroom with quite a diverse needs, and there isn't always the ability to take it to the next level. Even if a teacher might come up with 5 ideas of how to do it, the reality is, and I've spoken to those teachers that say the reality is that they don't get the time and the effort to plan it. So it can be quite difficult. And also the speed at which our children go through sometimes means that it's fine for the first couple of years that they're in school, but as they advance on, the differentiation becomes a lot harder to do, especially when our students move from primary to secondary school, when you're starting to look at Key Stage 3, and then you don't have the ability to go to the infant school and get resources, because actually you're in secondary school and there's nothing behind that. And if you're not prepared, so we have in the primary sector non-specialist teachers who don't necessarily have the confidence in their own maths ability, and then you have in secondary school the maths specialists who are really good at maths but at that level and don't understand how to do the building blocks because they've never had to teach primary maths.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And often when they're hitting secondary school, that's almost the most important place to keep the maths as practical as possible. And it can absolutely be done in mainstream, so if they've got the right support and the right kind of specialist support in terms of outreach, and actually that the teachers got that time to think and to do their planning, and the TAs are around to do that, to make those kind of practical involvements, isn't it? But like you said, by the time you get to secondary, maths teachers are generally pretty good at maths and actually are looking at the higher level maths, and they're not necessarily used to teaching those very basic concepts, and they kind of forget that that's something they've got to really, really work on for our guys. And you can't just teach it and in maths lesson and go. Actually, it needs to be brought to life in the classroom and actually made practical and made real. Because actually, and I think if those teachers were sat down and said, you know what, you're as a maths teacher right now, you're going to be responsible for whether or not this person can identify that they're being taken advantage of when they're 25. I wonder if they had that better understanding that actually the impact they can have is so huge, whether that would change. Because I think sometimes they think it feels that their job is just to teach the curriculum maths, and when they've done the tick box that's done, great. But actually, it's so important, isn't it, for our guys, that it's got to be meaningful.
It's got to be meaningful, but the reality is we're in an education structure that does not encourage that. And in secondary school especially, if you ask what the teachers are focused on, they're focused on a Progress 8 score, which says, they're looking at what a student comes in at and they're trying to do better for that at the GCSE. So that is their main goal and orientation. And it's quite difficult at times to go, but do you not understand that this person's going to get taken advantage of? And they're almost, and this is me being, I'm not saying it, that's the general feeling. not their priority. Their priority is to get the GCSE result, which gives the Progress 8 score, which makes it look better for the school. So that is my cynical view. And as I said, I don't always make friends in saying it, but it is the reality. And being involved in some of the curriculum conversations with the program that's going on at the moment that is the reality of what people are saying, which is at the moment, education is still focused on the achievement of targets and goals.
And teachers are being pulled in so many different directions, aren't they? There's so many things that they have to do and achieve that it makes it really quite hard for them to be able to put that focus on.
And one of the things that I do say is most of our children are at the beck and call of the teaching assistants that are working with them. It's their energy, their effort, their understanding, their ability to take the education remit and run with it is what differentiates most of our children. When you look at those that are successful, there will be a trace back to good TAs. And I think we could, if there was something that I would do tomorrow, is I would recognise TAs much better in our system, because they deliver something for the SEND community that is, you can't put money on it. It's completely valuable to our life. And also, as we move through to looking at independence, it is very key to how they not only help teach, but also teach and help independence. So there is sometimes an over-reliance, but there's a lovely way of being able to have somebody who can teach, but also instill independence in a student. So that lovely combination of both.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And we've had some amazing TAs in the past where actually they make, I think it's underestimated how much of a life and game changer it can be for a whole family. If you know you've got someone working with your child who's, smashing it, actually, and you can make an entire family's life feel more comfortable and feel more at ease, where you've got people that don't necessarily understand your child or don't necessarily get it, the tension that can build up in a household is pretty massive. So a big thank you to all those TAs and
all
teachers,
those TAs and teachers
and senior leaders who are absolutely smashing it, because it makes such a huge difference to our families. If there was one kind of key point that you want people to take away today, what do you think that might be? What can they do, particularly for kind of maybe one for parents and one for teachers, like things that they can do?
Right. So for parents, and I have thought about this one, my biggest is time. Okay, so parents, listen up. You're going to ditch analog time from this day forward.
Yes.
Yeah. So that means anyone who's listening, it's taken me quite a while to do this, but that means that I do not use analog time. I read an analog clock as digital. So it is 1:15, it is 1:45. So not 1:15 or 1:45. So we read it always as digital, and we keep our language always as digital. It may sound strange not using analog, but the way I look at it is analog time is not in our technology. If you go to a station, a bus station timetable, everything's digital. It will be digital 12 hours and 24 hours, which is another matter. But the idea behind it is if you get used to reading an analog clock and saying it in digital and only ever using the digital way of saying time, you will be consistent. I liken it to imperial and metric. So we still slip into a pint, I need to go get a pint of milk, when fine rightly, you're not buying a pint of milk, you're actually buying 4 litres of milk. But the reality is I consider analog time as the old way in which we say it. And if you do not talk about it, and you don't teach it, teachers, and you teach digital first, what it actually does is it enables our children to understand time much quicker and better, much quicker in a way that makes sense, because it's what they see day in, day out. For educators, well, I would say there is another way of doing things. And if you have children who, for whatever reason, they are not following the national curriculum timescale and or structure, that do consider an alternative approach, which clearly
Maths
for Life does.
is set up for.
Yeah, it's set up for. And it's set up for, but you can run it in parallel with other things you do. That's one of the interesting things I say to parents, to educators, to anyone working with children, is you're not going to confuse them. What you actually want to do is you want to bring out what is happening in life to them, to make them understand. I'm going to end on one thing, because I think educators and parents have lost sight of the maths that we use day in, day out, because we think of maths as times tables and problems. But On a daily basis, somebody might go down to a shopping parade and for their lunch, and they have a decision to make whether or not to queue for the deli and get their sandwich made, which they prefer, or go to the supermarket next door and get a pre-made sandwich. And they will go down and they've got 30 minutes for their lunch, and they'll look at the deli and go, oh, 7 people in the queue. I join it in 8. Roughly 3 minutes per sandwich. I'm going to be in the queue, and it's going to take me 24 minutes to get that sandwich. 30 minutes for lunch. I'm going to go next door and get to the supermarket and buy my sandwich. The level of maths that person has employed in an instantaneous second in making those decisions, they have completely forgotten about. And the one thing that we do at Maths for Life is we look at what that decision is, and we say, what are all the underpinning math skills that you need to do? And we make sure that there is a pathway to getting to that. So that means starting at foundations and understanding time passing, working up, looking at grouping, and putting it all together so that when we have the adult who has come through this process, they will be able to make that decision, or they will be able to know enough of what to do. They may need the calculator to work out what it is, but they will still be able to make that decision. So that's the way in which I would say to parents and educators is think about the maths that you use to make decisions daily, and that is what you should be teaching your students to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's been really brilliant talking to you and some really insightful moments. And if you're interested in learning more, then you can go to the Maths for Life website or check out Karen on Facebook, Instagram, and any other socials.
Any other socials, yes.
So if you've enjoyed the session today, then please do share it with your friends, with other educators, and let us know how you're getting on.